If you've ever worked in silence, given everything you had, and wondered if anyone even noticed, then this story is going to hit you harder than you expect. For 362 nights, a woman named Josephine mopped floors, emptied trash cans, and wiped desks in a building where nobody knew her name. But the CEO on the 14th floor knew her name. He knew her schedule. He knew she limped on her left leg after midnight. He knew she whispered to a photograph she kept in her cart. And he never said a word. Not once. Until the night she didn't show up, and he realized he was the only one who noticed she was gone. Welcome to today's story. Before we begin, please subscribe and like this video. We always love hearing where our viewers are from. Tell us in the comments. New York? Nairobi? Maybe Kingston or Manchester? Say hello. Now, let me tell you about a building. A tall building in the middle of a city that never seemed to sleep. 31 floors of glass and steel. The kind of building that catches the sun in the morning and throws it back at you like it's showing off. The sign out front said, Callaway Group, in silver letters so clean they looked wet. Inside, the lobby had black marble floors, a reception desk the size of a small boat, and 2 elevators with mirrors on every wall so you could see yourself from angles you didn't know existed. The building smelled like new carpet during the day, when the executives and the analysts and the assistants filled it up with their coffee cups and their leather bags and their voices bouncing off the glass. But at night, after everyone left, the building smelled like nothing, just empty air and silence. That is when Josephine came. Josephine Moreau was 51 years old. She was a small woman, 5'2", maybe 5'3" if she stood very straight, which she rarely did because her back had been giving her trouble for years. She had brown skin the color of dark honey, and her hair was black with streaks of silver she didn't bother to hide. She kept it in a low bun, always, pinned with 2 bobby pins that she bought in packs of 50 from the dollar store. Her face was round, with deep lines around her mouth that came from years of smiling and years of not smiling. Her left knee had a problem, something with the cartilage, the doctor at the free clinic had told her, using words she wrote down on a receipt but never fully understood. It meant that after a few hours on her feet, she limped. Not badly, just enough that you'd notice if you watched. And someone was watching. Josephine wore the same uniform every night. Dark blue pants, a dark blue shirt with a small logo on the chest that said Pinnacle Cleaning Services, and white sneakers that she replaced every 4 months when the soles wore thin. She carried a cleaning cart, gray plastic with a squeaky wheel on the front left corner that she'd asked her supervisor to fix 3 times. Nobody fixed it. So she learned to push the cart at a slight angle to keep the squeak quiet. She kept her supplies organized the same way every night. Spray bottles on the left, rags in the middle, trash bags on the right. And in the top tray, tucked between the glass cleaner and the paper towels, she kept a small photograph in a plastic sleeve. A photograph of a boy, about 7 years old, with a wide grin and a gap where his 2 front teeth should have been, wearing a yellow t-shirt and holding a soccer ball like it was the most important thing in the world. That boy's name was Simon, and he was the reason Josephine pushed that squeaky cart through 31 floors of silence every single night. But I'll get to Simon. First, let me tell you about the man on the 14th floor. His name was Elliot Callaway. He was 44 years old, the CEO of the Callaway Group, a consulting and investment firm his father had started 30 years ago, and Elliot had taken over 8 years ago when his father retired to a house on a lake somewhere and stopped answering phone calls. Elliot was tall, 6'1", and thin in a way that made his suits look like they were hanging on him rather than fitting him. He had sandy brown hair that was starting to thin at the crown, wire-rimmed glasses he was always pushing up with one finger, and a jaw that was softer than you'd expect for a man who ran a company worth $400 million. He didn't look like a CEO. He looked like a college professor who had accidentally wandered into the wrong building and was too polite to leave. Elliot's office was on the 14th floor, corner office. Floor-to-ceiling windows on 2 walls, a desk made of walnut that his father had picked out and Elliot had never liked but kept because replacing it felt like an argument he didn't want to have, even though his father was 200 miles away on a lake. The office had a leather couch, a bookshelf full of books he had actually read, which made him unusual among CEOs, and a small table in the corner with a chess set that no one ever played. The pieces were dusty. The board was perfectly arranged. It had been that way for 3 years. Elliot had a habit of staying late, not because the work demanded it, though it often did, but because going home meant going to an apartment with high ceilings and no sound. His wife, Meredith, had left 2 years ago. Not dramatically, no fight, no slammed door. She just came home one evening and said, "Elliot, I love you, but I don't think you've been in the same room with me in 3 years, even when we're sitting side by side." She moved out the following weekend. Elliot helped her carry boxes. They were very polite about it. That politeness was worse than any argument would have been. He had no children. He had a younger sister named Greta who lived in another state and called him on birthdays and holidays with the reliable warmth of a greeting card. He had colleagues, not friends. He had a driver named Martin who picked him up in the mornings and dropped him off at night, and who knew more about Elliot's schedule than Elliot did. And he had a security system. But what happened next changed everything. 36 cameras. That is how many the Callaway Group building had. Lobby, hallways, stairwells, parking garage, loading dock, and every floor's main corridor. The feeds ran to a security office in the basement where a guard named Phil sat every night watching 12 screens and eating sandwiches his wife made him. Phil had been doing this for 9 years. He knew every corner of those feeds the way a sailor knows the coastline. Nothing surprised him. Not the analyst who came back at 2 in the morning to grab a forgotten laptop. Not the pigeon that somehow got into the stairwell on the 22nd floor and lived there for a week. Nothing. But Elliot had something Phil didn't. Elliot had a private feed. 2 years ago, after a break-in at a competitor's office, Elliot had a camera installed in his own office. Not the hallway outside, the office itself. It was small, mounted in the upper corner behind a plant, and it fed directly to an app on his phone and his home computer. It was for security, he told himself, to protect documents, sensitive files, client information. That was the reason. The real reason was lonelier than that. The real reason was that Elliot Callaway, sitting in his empty apartment at midnight, had nothing to watch except his own ceiling. And one night, out of boredom or sadness or something in between, he opened the camera app on his phone and saw something he didn't expect. A woman in his office, cleaning. She was wiping his desk with a yellow cloth, moving slowly, carefully, lifting each item, the pen holder, the stapler, the small framed photo of his parents on their wedding day, and wiping underneath, then placing each item back in exactly the same position. She moved like someone who understood that another person's space was sacred, that you didn't just push things around, you respected them. Elliot watched for 10 minutes. Then he closed the app. The next night, he opened it again. She was there. Same cloth, same care. She emptied his trash can, straightened his chair, and sprayed the glass on his window. When she was done, she paused. She reached into her cart and pulled out the photograph in the plastic sleeve. She looked at it for a few seconds. She touched it with one finger. Then she put it back and pushed her squeaky cart out the door. And that was only the beginning. Elliot started watching every night. Not for long. 10 minutes, sometimes 15. He told himself it was routine, security, making sure no one tampered with anything. But that wasn't it. He watched because Josephine was the only person he saw all day who moved through the world like she was trying not to disturb it. Everyone else in his life, the analysts, the board members, the lawyers, the clients, moved through the world like they owned it. Josephine moved through it like a guest who was grateful to be there. He noticed things, small things. She always started with the left side of his desk and moved right. She hummed sometimes, low and barely audible through the camera's microphone. An old melody, something that sounded like a lullaby in a language he didn't recognize. She limped after midnight, always after midnight, like her knee had a timer on it. She talked to the photograph. Not every night, but some nights. He couldn't make out the words, just the shape of her mouth moving, and the way her face softened when she looked at that picture, like the whole world narrowed down to that one small square of paper. He looked up her name in the cleaning company's contract. Josephine Moreau. He checked the schedule. She was assigned floors 12 through 18, Monday through Saturday, 8:30 p.m. to 4:30 a.m. She had been on the contract for 2 years. Before that, the records didn't say. Weeks turned into months. Elliot watched. Josephine cleaned. Neither of them knew the other existed in any real way. She was a woman on a screen. He was a name on a door she wiped down every night. Two people sharing the same room at different hours, connected by nothing except a camera and a walnut desk and the silence that lives inside tall buildings after dark. But what Elliot didn't know yet was that Josephine's story was about to collide with his in a way neither of them could have prepared for. Let me tell you about Simon. Simon was Josephine's grandson, her only grandchild. Her daughter Marie had given birth to Simon when she was 19 years old. Marie was beautiful and wild and broke in ways that Josephine couldn't fix no matter how hard she tried. Marie had Simon, loved him fiercely for 3 years, and then started disappearing. First for a night, then a weekend, then weeks. The drugs came next, or maybe they were there before and Josephine just didn't see them. By the time Simon was 4, Marie was gone more than she was home. By the time he was 5, she was gone entirely. A phone call from a city 300 miles away, a hospital, an overdose. Marie survived that one. She didn't survive the next one, 8 months later. Josephine buried her daughter on a Tuesday. Simon stood beside her at the grave, holding her hand, wearing a white shirt that was too big for him. He was 6. He didn't cry. He looked at the ground and held Josephine's hand and said, "Grand-mère, is Mama in the sky now?" Josephine said, "Yes, baby, she's in the sky." Simon looked up and squinted and said, "I can't see her." Josephine picked him up and held him against her chest and said, "You don't see her with your eyes, mon cœur. You see her with your heart." Simon was 12 now, a quiet boy with his mother's eyes and his grandmother's steadiness. He went to school, did his homework at the kitchen table in their one-bedroom apartment that smelled like laundry detergent and the Haitian rice and beans Josephine cooked on Sunday mornings. He was good at math. His teacher, Mrs. Coleman, said he was gifted. That word again. Gifted. The word teachers use when they see something shining inside a child who has every reason not to shine. But Simon needed things Josephine couldn't afford. A tutor for the advanced math program. New glasses. His prescription had changed and everything was blurry at the edges. A winter coat that actually fit. School supplies. A field trip deposit. The list never ended. It just grew, quietly, like a vine climbing a wall. Josephine made $11.60 an hour. She worked 6 nights a week. After taxes, after rent, after the electric bill and the gas bill and the bus pass and the groceries, she had about $40 left each week. $40. She kept it in an envelope taped to the inside of the kitchen cabinet, behind the rice. She called it Simon's envelope. Every week she added what she could. Sometimes 40, sometimes 30, sometimes 12. Now, here is where the story takes a turn nobody expected. It was a Wednesday night in January. Cold. The kind of cold that gets into your bones and sets up camp. Josephine arrived at the Callaway building at 8:30, signed in with Phil at the security desk, and pushed her cart to the service elevator. She cleaned floors 12 and 13 without trouble. She reached 14, Elliot's floor, at 10:45. She was wiping the conference room table when her phone buzzed in her pocket. She didn't usually check her phone during work. She wasn't allowed to. But something made her pull it out. A text from Mrs. Coleman, Simon's teacher. It said, "Mrs. Moreau, I'm sorry to bother you so late. Simon had an incident at after-school tutoring today. He collapsed during math practice. The school nurse thinks it was related to his blood sugar. He's okay now. Your neighbor, Mrs. Franklin, picked him up. Please call me when you can." Josephine's hands went numb. The cleaning rag fell out of her grip and landed on the conference table. She stood there, in that dark room with the city lights coming through the windows, and her heart beat so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She wanted to leave. Right then. Get on a bus, go home, hold Simon. But she couldn't. If she left early, she would lose hours. If she lost hours, she would lose pay. If she lost pay, she couldn't make rent. The math of poverty is brutal. It doesn't leave room for emergencies. It barely leaves room for breathing. She picked up the rag. She finished the conference room. She moved to Elliot's office. Her hands were shaking. She wiped the desk. Left to right, same as always. But she was slower tonight. She lifted the pen holder and set it down hard. It made a sound on the walnut. She picked up the framed photo of Elliot's parents and held it for a moment, staring at the two smiling faces, and something broke inside her. Not loudly, quietly, like a thread snapping somewhere deep. She sat down in Elliot's chair. She had never done this before. Never once in 2 years. She sat in his leather chair behind his walnut desk and put her elbows on the surface and pressed her forehead against her palms and cried. Silent crying. The kind where your shoulders move but no sound comes out because you've trained yourself not to make noise in spaces that don't belong to you. She pulled out the photograph of Simon. She held it in both hands and whispered, "I'm trying, mon cœur. I'm trying so hard." Then she wiped her face with the back of her sleeve, put the photograph away, stood up, straightened the chair so it looked exactly as it had before, and finished cleaning the office. She worked until 4:30. She took the bus home. She checked on Simon, who was asleep with his math book on his chest and his broken glasses on the nightstand. She kissed his forehead and sat on the edge of his bed and watched him breathe. 14 miles away, Elliot Calloway sat in his apartment with his phone in his hand and a tightness in his chest he couldn't explain. He had watched it all. The phone check, the dropped rag, the sitting in his chair, the crying, the photograph, the whispered words he couldn't quite hear but could feel. He set his phone down. He stared at the ceiling, and for the first time in a very long time, Elliot Calloway felt something he had thought he'd lost the ability to feel. Shame. And just when you thought this was about a man watching from a distance, everything shifted. Elliot didn't sleep that night. He went to the office at 6 in the morning, 3 hours before anyone else. He sat at his desk, the same desk Josephine had cried on, and looked at the chair and tried to imagine what it felt like to sit in someone else's chair because the weight of your own life was too heavy to stand. He opened the cleaning contract on his computer. Pinnacle Cleaning Services. He found the contact number and called. A woman answered. He asked about the cleaner assigned to the 14th floor. The woman said she couldn't share employee details. Elliot said he understood. He asked if the company offered health insurance to its workers. The woman laughed. Not cruelly, more like he had asked if the sky was purple. She said no. The workers were classified as independent contractors. No insurance, no benefits, no sick days. Elliot hung up. He sat there for 20 minutes. Then he called his head of HR, a woman named Dana, and said, "I need you to find out something for me." What he did next, he told no one about. And what Josephine didn't know yet would change her life completely. Elliot didn't approach Josephine. He didn't introduce himself. He didn't reveal the camera. He did something quieter, and whether it was cowardice or kindness depends on how you look at it. The following week, Simon's school received an anonymous donation. It covered the advanced math tutoring program for the entire year, not just for Simon, but for every child in the program. The letter accompanying the check said only, "For the students who shine when no one is watching." Mrs. Coleman told Josephine about it at a parent meeting. Josephine pressed her hand to her chest and said, "Who would do such a thing?" Mrs. Coleman said they didn't know. Anonymous. Josephine shook her head slowly and said, "There are angels in this world. You just don't always see their wings." 2 weeks later, a package arrived at Josephine's apartment. Inside was a pair of children's glasses, the correct prescription, which Josephine had mentioned to Mrs. Coleman during the same meeting, and a winter coat in Simon's size. Navy blue, good quality. No note, no return address. Simon put on the coat and looked at himself in the bathroom mirror and said, "Grand-mère, someone knows I exist." Josephine looked at her grandson in his new coat with his new glasses, and her eyes filled up and she said, "Of course someone knows, mon cœur. The world is paying attention, even when you think it isn't. But the biggest secret hadn't come out yet. For months, the anonymous gifts continued. A grocery delivery once a month. Proper food, the kind Josephine couldn't usually afford. A prepaid bus pass. An envelope with enough cash to cover Simon's field trip and new school supplies. Each time, no note, no name. Just things arriving like rain in a dry season. Josephine told her neighbor, Mrs. Franklin, a 70-year-old Jamaican woman with a loud voice and a heart the size of the whole apartment building, about the gifts. Mrs. Franklin sat in her kitchen with a cup of ginger tea and said, "Baby, don't question a blessing. Just say thank you and keep moving." Josephine said, "But who would do this? I don't know anyone." Mrs. Franklin said, "Maybe that's the point. Maybe the best kind of love is the kind that doesn't need you to know where it comes from." Elliot watched the camera less now. He had cut it down to once or twice a week. Josephine still cleaned his office the same way. Left to right, careful hands, photograph in the cart. But she seemed lighter. She hummed more. Her limp was still there after midnight, but she didn't wince as much. One night she stood at his window after cleaning the glass and looked out at the city lights for a full minute, and she smiled. A real smile, the kind that reaches your eyes. Elliot saw it through the camera and closed the app and sat in his apartment and felt two things at the same time: glad and guilty. Glad that something in her world had shifted. Guilty that he was still watching from the shadows like a man who couldn't figure out how to step into the light. If you think that was complicated, wait until you hear what happened next. It was a Thursday night in November, almost a year after Elliot first noticed Josephine on the camera. She didn't show up. 8:30 came. Phil signed in the other cleaners. No Josephine. 9 o'clock. 10 o'clock. Phil called Pinnacle. They said she had called in sick. First time in 2 years. Elliot found out the next morning. He checked the camera footage. Empty office, untouched trash, the desk still dusty from yesterday. He felt a sensation he hadn't felt since Meredith left. A hollowness. A door opening onto nothing. He called Pinnacle again. They said Josephine was in the hospital. They didn't know which one. They didn't have details. She was a contractor. They were sending a replacement. Elliot spent 2 hours making phone calls. He called Dana in HR. He called his assistant. He called 3 hospitals before he found her. St. Anne's Medical Center, room 412. Admitted for a severe knee infection that had gone untreated for weeks because she couldn't afford to miss work, and couldn't afford the medication, and couldn't afford any of the things that people with money never have to think about affording. He drove to the hospital that evening. He parked in the garage and sat in his car for 30 minutes. He adjusted his glasses. He loosened his tie. He tightened his tie. He took off his tie entirely. He sat there holding it like a rope he didn't know what to do with. Then he got out and walked in. Room 412 was at the end of a hallway that smelled like disinfectant and overcooked vegetables. The door was half open. He knocked. A voice inside said, "Come in." Josephine was in the bed. Her left leg was elevated, wrapped in bandages. Her hair was loose. He had never seen it loose before, only in the tight bun, and it spread across the pillow in waves of black and silver. She looked smaller in the hospital bed. Smaller and older and very, very tired. Simon was sitting in a chair next to the bed, doing homework on a clipboard balanced on his knee. He was wearing the navy coat. He looked up when Elliot walked in. His eyes were cautious behind his glasses. Josephine looked at Elliot. She didn't recognize him. Of course she didn't. She had never seen his face. She had only seen his name on the door she wiped every night. She said, "Can I help you?" Elliot stood in the doorway. His mouth was dry. He said, "My name is Elliot Calloway. You clean my office, the 14th floor." Josephine's eyebrows lifted. She tried to sit up straighter. Old habits. The instinct to be presentable in front of the boss. She said, "Mr. Calloway, I'm sorry I missed last night. I'll be back as soon as—" Elliot held up his hand. He said, "No, that's not why I'm here." He paused. He looked at Simon. He looked at the clipboard. He looked at the IV in Josephine's arm. He said, "I need to tell you something. and I don't know how to say it, so I'm just going to say it badly and hope you understand. Josephine waited. Elliot said, "There's a camera in my office. I installed it for security, but I saw you. Cleaning. Every night. For almost a year. I saw how you take care of that room. How you lift everything and put it back exactly where it was. I saw you talk to a photograph. I saw you, one night in January, sit in my chair and cry." The room went still. Simon stopped writing. Josephine's face changed. The softness went out of it. Something harder came in. Something guarded. She said, "You watched me?" Elliot said, "Yes." She said, "For a year?" He said, "Yes." She said, "And you never said anything, never introduced yourself, never came down and told me your name." Elliot looked at the floor. He said, "No." Josephine's jaw tightened. She gripped the edge of the blanket. She said, "Mr. Calloway, I am a private person. What I do in my work, the way I work, the things I carry with me, that is mine. You had no right." Elliot said, "You're right. I had no right." She said, "The gifts, the tuition, the glasses, the coat, that was you." He didn't answer. He didn't need to. She could see it on his face. She said, "You watched me cry in your chair, and instead of speaking to me like a person, you sent packages like I was a charity case." Elliot flinched. He said, "That's not what I—" She said, "That is exactly what it was. You sat in your apartment and watched me through a screen and decided what I needed without ever asking me what I needed." "You know what I needed, Mr. Calloway? I needed someone to see me. Not through a camera, with their eyes. I needed someone to walk into that office while I was cleaning and say, 'Hello, my name is Elliot, and I noticed that you take care of this room like it matters.' That would have cost you nothing, and it would have meant everything." Elliot stood there. His arms hung at his sides. His glasses were fogging up. From the heat of the room or the heat of the moment, he didn't know. He took them off and wiped them on his shirt and put them back on and still couldn't see clearly. He said, "You're right. I was afraid." She said, "Of what?" He said, "Of being real. Of standing in front of another person and letting them see that I am lonely and lost, and I didn't know how to reach across the distance between my floor and yours. So I watched. And I sent things. Because giving is easier than showing up. And I know now, that showing up is the only thing that actually counts." The room was quiet. The heart monitor beeped steadily. Simon looked at his grandmother. Then he looked at Elliot. Then he said in a voice that was steady and clear and 12 years old and ancient all at once, "My grandmère says that help you give in secret is kind, but help you give face to face is brave. She says kindness is easy. Bravery is hard." Elliot looked at this boy with the navy coat and the new glasses and the homework on his knee, and he felt something crack open inside his chest. Not break. Crack open. Like a seed splitting to make room for the root. He said, "Your grandmother is the wisest person I have ever watched from a distance, and I am very sorry it took me this long to walk into the room." Josephine was quiet for a long time. She looked at the ceiling. She looked at Simon. She touched her mother's gold chain. No, she didn't have a chain. She touched the edge of the blanket, rubbing the fabric between her fingers the way she rubbed her cleaning cloth before she started a surface. A habit. Something she did when she was thinking. She said, "Sit down, Mr. Calloway." He sat, in the plastic chair on the opposite side of the bed from Simon. He sat the way he sat in his empty apartment, carefully, like the furniture might reject him. Josephine said, "I will accept your apology, not because you deserve it yet, but because my daughter taught me that holding on to anger is like carrying a bucket of water uphill. It only spills on you." She paused. Then she said, "But if you want to help me, really help me, then don't send packages. Show up. Come to Simon's school and watch him solve equations that would make your analysts cry. Sit in my kitchen and eat rice and beans and tell me about your day. Be a person, not a donor, a person. Elliot nodded. He didn't trust his voice. He just nodded.
Simon reached into his backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper. He handed it to Elliot. It was a math test. Score: 98%. At the top, Mrs. Coleman had written in red ink, "Outstanding work, Simon." Simon said, "I got 2 points off because I showed my work wrong on problem 14. But I got the right answer." Elliot looked at that test and laughed. A real laugh. The first real laugh in so long that it surprised him, like hearing a song he had forgotten he knew. He said, "Problem 14 is always the tricky one." Simon smiled. The gap-toothed grin from the photograph. The same grin. Exactly the same. Elliot kept his word. He showed up. He came back 2 days later with soup from a restaurant near his office. Not fancy soup. Just chicken soup with noodles. He sat in the plastic chair and ate with Josephine and Simon, and they talked about Simon's math team and Josephine's childhood in Haiti, and the way her mother used to cook plantains over a charcoal fire so hot the skins blistered black. Elliot told them about his chess set that nobody played. Simon said, "I know chess. My friend Terrence taught me." Elliot said, "Then I'll bring the board next time." Simon said, "You better be ready to lose." Josephine watched this exchange, and something shifted in her face. Not forgiveness exactly. Something before forgiveness. The willingness to let it happen. Elliot paid for her surgery. She resisted. He said, "This is not a donation. This is a debt. I watched you care for my office for a year and paid you nothing extra for the dignity you brought to it. Let me pay that debt." Josephine looked at him and said, "A debt then, not charity." He said, "Never charity." She went back to work 6 weeks later, but not at Pinnacle Cleaning Services. Elliot hired her directly, not as a cleaner, as the facilities coordinator for the Callaway Group building. A real position, a salary, benefits, health insurance, a desk of her own on the 6th floor with a nameplate that said, Josephine Moreau, Facilities Coordinator. She managed the cleaning staff, the maintenance crew, the vendors. She organized supply orders and schedules and solved problems that the previous coordinator, a man named Greg who had quit after an argument about parking spaces, had left in a tangled mess. She was good at it. She was better than good. She knew what cleaners needed because she had been one. She knew what the building needed because she had touched every surface of it with her own hands. She treated every janitor and every maintenance worker by name, learned about their families, remembered their children's birthdays. The building, which had always been clean, became something more. It became cared for. There is a difference. The camera in Elliot's office was removed. He took it down himself, pulled it off the wall, put it in a drawer, and locked the drawer. He told Josephine he had done it. She said, "Good. Now you'll have to see me the regular way." He said, "What's the regular way?" She said, "With your eyes open and your feet in the room." Simon thrived. The math tutoring, the glasses, the stability of knowing his grandmother had a job that wouldn't disappear. It all added up. By the time he was 14, he was in the advanced program at his school, competing in citywide math tournaments, winning trophies he kept on the kitchen shelf next to the jar where Josephine used to keep Simon's envelope. The envelope was gone now. The jar held dried flowers instead. Elliot came to Simon's first tournament. He sat in the audience in a folding chair that was too small for him, next to Mrs. Franklin, who had brought ginger candies and handed them out to everyone within reach. When Simon solved the final problem, a complex equation involving variables that made most adults blink, Elliot stood up and clapped so hard his palms burned. Mrs. Franklin looked at him and said, "Who are you to that boy?" Elliot thought about it for a moment. Then he said, "I'm the man who almost missed him." Mrs. Franklin nodded. She gave him a ginger candy and said, "Well, you didn't miss him, and that's the part that counts." 3 years later, Simon applied to a university with a strong mathematics program. He wrote his application essay about his grandmother, about the cleaning cart with the squeaky wheel, about the photograph in the plastic sleeve. about a woman who pushed that cart through 31 floors of silence every night so that a boy she loved could wake up to a world that had room for him in it. The essay was 412 words. He didn't plan that number, it just happened. He got in. Full scholarship. When the acceptance letter arrived, Josephine sat at the kitchen table and held it in both hands and read it 7 times. Then she looked at Simon and said, "Your mother is watching from the sky right now, mon cœur, and she is so proud she can barely stand it." Simon sat down next to her. He was taller than her now, taller than everyone in the apartment. A young man with his mother's eyes and his grandmother's steadiness, and a mind that could see patterns in numbers the way some people see patterns in stars. He put his arm around her and said, "She's not the only one watching, grand-mère. She never was." Josephine leaned into her grandson. She closed her eyes. The apartment smelled like rice and beans and laundry detergent and something else. Something you can't buy or clean or schedule or organize. Something that just grows in the spaces between people when they stop watching from a distance and start showing up in the room. Elliot came to Simon's graduation. He brought the chess set. The same one from his office, the dusty one nobody played. He had cleaned it. Every piece polished. The board wiped down. He gave it to Simon and said, "You told me to be ready to lose. I've been losing to you for 5 years. I think you've earned the board." Simon took the chess set. He held it the way his grandmother used to hold the photograph in the cleaning cart. Carefully, like it held something more than what you could see. He said, "Mr. Calloway, can I ask you something?" Elliot said, "Anything." Simon said, "Why did you watch her for a year before you did anything?" Elliot pushed his glasses up. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Because I was a man who knew how to look at screens but had forgotten how to look at people. Your grandmother taught me the difference." Simon nodded. He put the chess set under his arm and said, "She teaches everyone that. She just doesn't know it." Josephine was standing 10 feet away, talking to Mrs. Franklin, who had brought a cake so big it needed its own chair. She didn't hear what Simon said, but she felt something, the way you feel someone looking at you from across a room. And she turned and saw her grandson and this tall, awkward man with wire-rimmed glasses standing together, and she didn't need to hear the words. She just smiled. A real smile. The kind that reaches your eyes. The same smile Elliot had seen through a camera one night and realized, too late and just in time, was never meant to be watched. It was meant to be shared. And so the story ends. But before you go, like, subscribe, and leave us a comment. Tell us where you're watching from and what this story taught you. We read every single comment. See you in the next story.